Good evening, my name is Pat. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you very much. I love you too. And does this light make any difference? Great, because it bugs me. And I'm super grateful to be sober. I'm grateful to be here. I'm just going to hope that it goes. It's going. We're working. All right. You want me to talk closer?
Yeah.
Okay. There you go. And I'm grateful to be sober. I'm grateful to be here. I want to thank you for your opening talk. And I got tricked into my first young people's and Alcoholics Anonymous commitment as well. My mom has 40 years sober, which I'll get into. And the young people in my home group, which is a Wednesday night speaker meeting at Laguna Beach, they were trying to get me involved in young people. And I was like, I'm not doing young people. That's dumb. Really, I was scared. Right. And so one week they came to the meeting and they're like, yeah, these guys at the young people's meeting are talking crap on your mom. And so I got like all my sponsees, right? Like 10 of my gang. And we go to show up at the young people's meeting to kick this guy's ass. And we show up to the meeting, and I was always taught that anytime I'm asked to do something in Alcoholics Anonymous, just they say yes, because that's where God wants me to be. And I don't know why God wants me here in Arizona tonight, but I'm here, and I showed up that day, all pride and all ego to tell this guy. And there was a co-literature commitment available, and they co-literature. And so I raised my hand to make myself available, and I got the position. And I've never met the guy since, and that's how I got hustled. And but I love young people in Alcoholics Anonymous. For me, it's like a big needle of just enthusiasm right into my vein. You know what I mean? And like the excitement in this room is the excitement that I need in order for me to stay sober one day at a time. Like I need the enthusiasm of Alcoholics Anonymous, in order to come back here one more day. And I thank you guys, and I thank you for your talk. And my sobriety date's October 23rd, 2002. I didn't plan on staying sober 13 minutes, let alone 13 years, and I have a home group and I have a sponsor, and his name's Jonathan C. And the most important thing about that relationship is that sponsor, he knows that he's my sponsor. And if you're in the room and I wonder if my sponsor knows, you might want to call them after the meeting, but he knows it. I want to thank I don't know what time it was, 2:00 in the afternoon, something. No, it was earlier than that, 1:00 marathon meeting. There was about 5 of you in that meeting. I want to thank you for 12-stepping me today. Because the truth of my alcoholism, which centers in my mind, I don't play well with others. I don't know if you guys come to AA and you're like, just, you know how to play with people in the play box, the sandbox. I'm not good at it. One of my favorite lines in Alcoholics Anonymous in the 12 and 12, it says that our real problem is our inability to form a true bond with another human being. And like, I get that so well, and I like to throw temper tantrums. I like to take my ball and go home. I don't know if you're like that, but that's me, and I'm in one of those times in my sobriety where I just want to take my ball and go home and cut everyone out of my life. And I have a head that talks, right? And I'm in my room, and I don't know too many people here this morning, and so one of the people giving the books talked about they didn't find it necessary to take a drink. I found it necessary many times in Alcoholics Anonymous to take a drink. And this morning I was either going to kill myself or I was going to drink. And I called my sponsor, and he was like, I sent him a text. He's like, can't talk to you till 4:30. And I'm like, because my dependency lies on him, right? He's going to give me the magical solution. I'm like, here we are, recovery, And he wasn't there for me. And I said a prayer, and intuition said, why don't you go to that marathon meeting? Maybe there's a marathon meeting happening right now. And I went down there, and I really thanked the 5 people that were in that room. I think 2 of them were there to support. And the topic was trust God, clean house, help others. And then it was a tag meeting. And I was like, oh man. All right. And I had the opportunity to be honest about what's going on in between the ears. And it was loud and clear. Intuition said, go to your room and write inventory. I went to my room. I wrote inventory for 2 hours, and I was free. And I called my sponsor, and I'll meet with him next week. And that inventory allowed me to be a vessel of God's message to you. And I want to thank you guys for saving my life this morning. My first Alcoholics Anonymous, but I want to thank Lisa also for being so kind to me. And I just have the utmost love for you, and I thank you for your kindness, And my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, I was 11 months old. I didn't have a drinking problem, but my mom did, And I want to, oh, the kids, there's some kids here. Welcome to AA, kids that are running around. Welcome. I loved growing up in Alcoholics Anonymous. My mom went to conventions all the time, and I rip-roared around Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, my first memory in AA, I stole 15 packs of sugar, and I was outside the AA meeting sucking down sugar, and I've gone to treatment and they're like, you have an addictive personality. I don't know about that, but I can tell you that I was definitely going for the produced effect by sugar that night, and I zip around AA, and my mom was being sentenced to prison for 10 years or come to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she came to AA, and my mom's a blackout drinker, which it is what it is. But for all I know, my dad could be the cable guy, you know what I mean? And, it's like bow chicka bow now, and my mom didn't even know she was pregnant till she was in labor, which is kind of weird, I remember looking at the family photo albums when I was a kid, and there's a paramedic, and there's a newspaper article in the photo album, and there's a paramedic and a fire engine. They're holding this little baby, and when I got old enough to read, it said Patrick Jason Ochoa, born on blah, blah, blah at this time, and I've always been like, just riddled with fear, paralyzing fear. I mean? I didn't have the vocabulary to be like, hey, mom, like, is this me? Hey, mom, like, what happened? And as I've grown older, what I've come to find out is that my mom came out of a blackout, and the paramedics, like, you need to name him, and I guess she had thought she was constipated, so she called 911, and so she came out of a blackout, and the paramedic's like, you need to name him. She's like, name what? So she named me Patrick so she wouldn't forget my name. Her name's Patti, and doesn't make me alcoholic, just makes me a little weird, and but I grew up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, if love had anything to do with alcoholism, I've never taken my first drink. I was a little kid. I sat in the crowd. I could recite chapter 5. I could recite the 12 traditions. I held hands at the end of the meeting. I was like, keep coming back, and the old timers were telling me, we'll save this seat right here for you, kid, and I had no clue what they meant, you know what I mean? But there's my seat, and I mean, I thought when I got done playing, I had a chair, and I would sit in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. The speaker would be going on, my head would be bobbing. I suffer from the spiritual malady of this disease long before I ever took my first drink. I identify with alcoholism. I identify with the loneliness that only we understand as a little kid, And the love that I feel in this room tonight is the love that I was raised with. I mean, the women in AA, they were like, oh my God, he's so cute. Can I have him for the weekend? My mom would be like, sure, go ahead, and they took me to the Grand Canyon. They took me whitewater rafting, and I met some of these women today, and they're like, oh my God, your mom let me have you when I had 7 days sober, and I mean, my kid was here earlier. I was keeping a close eye on him. I'm not letting him go home with any of you, you know what I mean? And, but AA was probably different 40 years ago. I don't know. I'd be sitting in the AA meeting, and a speaker would be speaking, and someone would fall out of their chair, and they'd flop around, and me and my other friends from AA would laugh at the guy, look at that guy over there. And my mom would bring women home, and they'd detox on our couch. I watched women die of this disease right in my home. If knowledge had anything to do with alcoholism, I've never taken my first drink, and I always wanted a connection with my dad. I don't know if there's any other right fielders in the audience, but I'm a right fielder on the baseball team, The best way to describe myself as a kid is I'm the kid that smells like poopy pants and syrup, that kid. And I show up to elementary school, my hair is like, and I'm just like weird, I'm awkward. That's how I am today, you know what I mean? Like, I walk in the room tonight, I'm like, I'll show up at 6:45. I don't want to, I don't want to socialize, you know what I mean? And like, that's a right field is like a perfect position for a guy like me. You know, I remember the neighborhood sports. There's 2 team captains. I'll take Bill and Sandra and Bobby, and there's 2 of us left. And the guy goes, well, I guess I'll take Pat. You know, I'm like, you know, poopy pants, you know, and I'm a right fielder. It's the pity position. You know what I mean? It's like he can't throw. The ball's never hit out there, you know, and I'm in right field. I probably would have been diagnosed with ADD as a little kid, you know. I wasn't really a big thing back then, but I'm like in left field looking for the long grass thing with the white thing on there. Like a dandelion, right? I was told that if I found that thing, I could have a wish, you know what I mean? So I'm like looking for a wish because I just want a different life, you know what I mean? And I'm in left field and the coach is yelling at me, other side of the field, kid. I'm like, well, poopy pants, go back over to right field, you know, and you know, I strike out every time I'm up at bat. I always hear the coach, keep your eye on the ball, kid. And I strike out, you know, and one day I was on second base. I don't know how the heck I got there, but I'm on second base. I'm like, what the hell do I do? And the kid cracked the line drive and I ran back to first base, man. And it was like a triple play in the wrong direction, you know, little poopy pants in the dugout, you know, and all my friends were running out of the dugout. And what I heard him say is, you're a failure, you're a loser, and you're no good. Right? No idea where those thoughts came from, but those were the thoughts that were going on in my head. I remember looking at my mom that day and she was standing there clapping, you know what I mean? So proud of her son. Right? And not proud because I got a triple play, but proud because I was playing the game of baseball, you know? I remember looking at my mom that day saying, if I only had a dad, that had never happened. And I quickly started to build this belief system that was going to separate me from you as a little kid, and I had no idea, you know? And I remember I was 9 years old. I was at an AA meeting with my mom, and it was in Laguna Beach. It was at a hospital. It's still a speaker meeting on Saturday night there, and we'd run around the AA meeting, and there was this guy. He was always outside smoking cigarettes, and he had this long trench coat on. He had this eye patch on, and now I know that Rick, he was a chronic relapser, but we didn't know that at the time. We used to throw little rocks at him, you know, and he'd go, "Come here, little shit," you know, and we'd take off running, and so we threw a little pebble at Rick, and he came chasing us after us, and we ended up in the parking structure between the 3rd and the 4th story of this parking structure, and it was me and my little friends. I was 9 years old, and these kids pulled out a bottle of Jose Cuervo, and I mean, the week before, I remember the DARE program. I mean, a week before, my whole arm had all those red wristbands. I'm like, just say no, you know, and but not that day. That bottle came in around. I remember being scared about it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going on. Watched all the other kids. They put that stuff down. It got to me, and I took a big pull off that bottle. And I don't know what it was like the first time you drank tequila, but that stuff was nasty. I was like, spit that stuff out. And I was overcome with fear. And what that fear told me was that I wasn't going to be liked the rest of my life. Bottle came back around. I remember being excited about having it. I got the bottle. I took a big pull off that bottle, and I held it down. And I didn't get drunk that day. But I can tell you the effect that alcohol has on this alcoholic body was all that fear went away. For the first time in my life, it felt like it connected to those kids. For the first time in my life, it felt like I was communicating. For the first time in my life, I just felt accepted. And I slowly stopped coming to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous with my mom at 9 years old. And I remember I grew up in Dana Point at the time, and we were running around the harbor, and this kid handed me a joint, you know what I mean? And I didn't know anything about the singleness of purpose. You know, it wouldn't have stopped me anyways, but the kid handed me a joint. I remember smoking that joint. I remember taking a big hit off that thing, and all of a sudden this elf was chasing me around the park, you know, and I was laughing hysterically, and I quickly thought, I was like, man, that cop at that DARE program told me if I smoked weed, bad things were going to happen to me, and nothing bad happened to me here, you know, and I quickly equated authority lie, teachers lie. There's a bunch of liars, you know what I mean? And, you know, I drank in a time when the cassette tape was moving over to a CD. It's a long time ago, but also good music was happening then. I grew up in Mission Viejo, California. I don't think they ever saw a gang member until I showed up, you know, and because we were listening to like Eazy-E, NWA, Ice Cube. I drank St. Ides out of a brown paper bag. I poured beer in the curve for the dead homies and everything, you know, and I didn't have any dead homies. I was getting ready for some, you know what I mean? And I wore a size 50 Dickies pulled all the way up, you know. I had a 5XL sweatshirt. I even walked with the limp, you know, and remember one day I was going to get a root canal, and it was 9 in the morning. I was 140 deep already at 9 in the morning. And I was in the back of the bus where homies sit, and me and my homie were back there, and I reached my hand in my pocket, and I pulled out 4 hits of LSD, and I'm like, hey man, you want to eat these? He's like, sure. So we both took 2 hits of LSD an hour before I was sitting in the dentist chair, and oh, so you guys know what happens an hour in, huh? I remember sitting in the dentist chair, and the tools were like, wah, 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 you know what I mean? And the dentist is like, you want strawberry or banana? I'm like, I don't care, just give me that mask, and he gave me the mask, and I took it off, and I said, you need to turn the nitrous level up and the oxygen level off, And he kind of looked at me kind of crazy, and I was thinking in my head, I just stole your tank last week, dude, you know what I mean? And it was like, bow, wow, 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 and oh, I love the bow, wow, wows, and oh man, I took my son like 6 months ago to go to the dentist, and he got the bow wow. I was so jealous, you know what I mean? And he got done, and we were making the next appointment, and the lady's like, when do you want to make it? And my son was pulling on my pant leg. He's like, can we come back tomorrow, Dad? And oh yeah. And like that's how it was for me. More was better, you know what I mean? And me and my little gang, we had jump night and the Friday night jump night in the park, and it's real important for you to know, I have a big mouth and big friends. I'm like a chihuahua, right? All want, and no bite, you know what I mean? And so it was Friday night jump night in the park. I knew my friends were going to beat me up, so I went and got a stun gun. And they called my name, and I just started zapping my friends, you know what I mean? And it was all fun for me, not for them. And one guy had a great idea to order Domino's pizza. Well, none of us had any money, so what? The pizza man came, and one guy grabbed the pizza, one guy handed him leaves for the money, and the third guy just stunned him with a stun gun. Wow, the guy went down and took off. We got the pizza. We didn't even get the money, And the next day, I get a call slip to go to the office, to go to the principal. Now I'm a call slip kind of guy, right? I'm the kid with potential. I go see the principal, and he's like, "Oh, you have such potential. If you would just apply yourself, good things could happen for you, right?" I don't know how you hear that, but I hear I'm a loser, you're a failure, you're never going to succeed, and so I show up to the principal's office that next day, and there's 2 sheriffs and a detective, and they want to know about this strong arm robbery case, Now, I don't want to be a snitch. The truth of the matter is I'm terrified of what you think of me, so I ended up taking the fall for my friends in the strong arm robbery case, and at 16 years old, I went to juvenile hall for strong arm robbery, and doesn't make me alcoholic, it's just the consequences of my disease at 16 years old, and I went to juvenile hall for 6 months, and I was on house arrest for 6 months, and my little homies came down to my house and on house arrest, and they brought me some weed and some alcohol, and they had needle and thread, and they told me I had to give myself the tattoo for my crazy life, and like, you need to give yourself 3 dots. I'm like, orale. And so I tattooed my ankle with 3 dots for my crazy life. And they left, and I'm thinking, man, I've never even been in a fight, you know what I mean? And so I plucked one of the dots off, and now I have 2 dots, and at 17 years old, my mom found a bag of weed in the house. My mom's an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, I'm speaking here, my mom's speaking somewhere else. My mom sponsored tons of women. My mom found a bag of weed in the house. My mom's like, you can't smoke weed in my house, right? Like, that's not going to happen. And I don't know how you hear that, but I hear I need to hide it better, and so I'm hiding it better, and I'm going, I'm coming home out of a blackout with my pants and my ankles peeing all over my mom's fish tank, at 17 years old, and one night I come home, I come out of a blackout, I don't have the key to the top lock, I needed to ring the doorbell, and my mom came to the door, and my mom had a bag of weed in the house, and my mom looked at me and she said, I told you if I found weed in the house again, I was going to have to kick you out. I walked in my bedroom at 17, I packed my bag, and I walked out, and I looked at my mom right in the eyes, and I said, I'm going to do whatever I can to ruin your life. And I watched my mom's heart break right in that moment. And I don't know how you deal with that shame and that guilt. But this alcoholic arrogance turned around and told my mom who she could do it to. F you, screw you, you're never going to see or talk to me again. And I didn't call my mom for a year and a half. And the call that my mom got a year and a half later was that I got in an accident and I needed to get stitches. My mom said, well, give me the address of the hospital. I'll send them the money. And I said, oh, no, they need cash. My mom was like, well, I don't know how I'm going to give you cash. So I taught my mom how to go down to the Western Union. And my mom wired me $150. And I called her a week later and told her I got another accident. And she went down to that Western Union and wired me $150. And then she'd call me and say, I'm not giving you the money. And I'd say, if I only had a dad, I wouldn't be in this situation. And I'd make her feel guilty and she'd go wire me the money. And then she'd say, I'm not going to give you the money. And I'd say, if you wouldn't have kicked me out, I wouldn't be in this situation. I'd hit that guilt button and she'd go wire me the money. Then I'd call my mom and tell her how much I loved her and she'd go wire me the money. And I'd be homeless from the age of 17 till I got sober at 27 years old. I've already identified my alcoholism at 17. I've already identified the spiritual malady. I've already identified what happens when I put alcohol in my body. Anything that gets in the way of me and a drink's going to lose. When I'm not drinking, the thought that precedes that first drink, And if you're in treatment, welcome. If those that are new, I want to welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're loaded right now, welcome. I went to treatment and I went to Betty Ford. I really don't have a problem with treatment. I went to Betty Ford. It's kind of hard to have a problem with treatment if you go to Betty Ford, you know what I mean? Maybe they do your laundry for you. They make your bed for you. It's prime rib Sundays. It's good food, Soft serve ice cream machine. Well, I guess I had one problem with Betty Ford. I wasn't allowed to fraternize. And so I had to ask, I'm like, what does that mean? They're like, well, you're not allowed to talk to the girls and the girls aren't allowed to talk to you. And if you're new, I don't know how that impacts you, but I called my mom. I'm like, I need to go to a different treatment center. You know what I mean? And my mom hung up on me, and it's August. I have pants, a long sleeve shirt, a sweatshirt, a beanie. I'm like shaking, freezing cold, and I'm in the infirmary and I'm a rule follower, Well, actually, I really want you to like me, so I'll follow your rules for as long as I can hold up. But I'm in the infirmary getting my medication, and this girl came walking in the back, and me and her caught eyes. Like, it was like a slow motion movie. Next thing you know, we were married, we had kids, we had a house, white picket fence, and I knew she loved me as much as I loved her. And so I wrote her a note, and the next day I walked around the lake this way, and she walked around the lake this way, and I passed her off a note. And 28 days later, we fell in love. And I know no one else has fallen in love when they're new, But I'm going to tell you how my love story went, and not like you care, right? But my counselor, Mark, he called me in and wanted me to do a first step. Now, I could recite the steps as a kid, right? So I went into Mark's office and I said, oh, Mark, I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol, sir, and my life's unmanageable. He's like, wow, you're getting it quick, And the next day we're in group and you're having issues. And Mark would look at me and go, Pat, what do you think about his problems? And I'm like giving you all the advice on your problems. And I'm kind of just skating through and I'm writing my girlfriend notes. And we never had a conversation, but my girlfriend, I write her a note. And one day I go to dinner to get my note. And I put on like my best shirt, my nicest clothes. And I go get a note and she doesn't give me a note. And I don't know what it's like when you're not loved, when you're new or old, but I'm like suicidal, you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm going to kill myself, I hate this. I'm leaving treatment, the day before I was like, hey, you guys want to do a book study, and now I'm like crazy. I want to kill myself. I'm asking for a razor blade. Dude's like, I thought we were going to do a book study, and I'm like, no, I'm over it. I hate this. I hate this life, and the next day I went around the lake and she gave me a note, and it was like getting hugged by God. It was like, all of a sudden the clouds parted, the sun came through, you know what I mean? And my counselor, Mark, called me and wanted me to do a second step. And I looked at Mark and I truly believed to the core of my soul, right? This is my story in retrospect, but I looked at Mark in the eyes and I said, Mark, I've come to believe that there's a power greater than myself that's going to restore me to sanity, And I truly believed it was God. I could have taken a lie detector test that day. I truly believed it was God, And I went in to go see Mark the next day or like a couple of days later. And he looked at me. He's like, you're doing so good in treatment. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm doing great, aren't I? And he said, you're doing so great. He's like, you got to do a 9-month program. You know what I mean? And so I wrote my girlfriend a note. You know what I mean? And I was like, I got to do a 9-month program. And she wrote me a note back. And she's like, I got to do a 9-month program too, And I'm like, hey, this is that God's will they're talking about, And so I'm like, hey, where should we go to sober living? She's let's go to Hawaii. I'm like, geez, romance too, And this is how delusional I was. I surfed one time. I grew up 3 miles from the beach. I surfed one time, fell and hit my head. I've never liked the ocean since. But I truly believe that I could go to Hawaii and become one with the ocean and find God. So I went and go tell my counselor, Mark. I said, Mark, I said, I'm turning my will life right over to the care of her. I mean, God, as I understand him, and I'm willing to do the 9-month program, and I want to go to Hawaii. I want to go to sober living. And Mark's like, all right. And I got coined out most likely to succeed guy, that guy in treatment. That's me, right? And I get out of treatment and I get on the plane to go to sober living in Hawaii. And I wasn't an alcoholic when I went to Betty Ford. I was a heroin addict. And so when the lady came, she's like, what do you want to drink? If you're not an alcoholic and you're a heroin addict, a Heineken sounds about right. Because alcohol isn't my problem. 12 or 13 Heinekens later, I landed in Hawaii. Now, I didn't hear anything in treatment about a phenomenon of craving. I didn't hear anything in treatment that it's the first one that gets you drunk. Right? I heard about a frontal lobe cortex or something like that, right? I have a 9th grade education. I'm terrified of what you think of me, so I don't ask questions. I just bob my head. I'm like, oh yeah, frontal lobe. Yes, got it, and I look at your paper to take the test, and I got off the plane that day to go to sober living, and I sat there that day and I thought, sober living, bar. Sober living, bar, you know what I mean? And I swear the bar had like 300 people in there. There was a live band. Everyone was dancing. I'm like, man, I'll go to sober living tomorrow, and I walked in the bar and I ordered another drink. And our literature says something to the effect to live by spiritual principles or die an alcoholic. That this says something to the effect that this is an easy choice for us. And I thought that I was making a choice, but alcohol made the choice for me to walk in that bar. I didn't know that when I put the first one in my body, I had no choice. And alcohol was going to make that choice for me. And I walked in that bar, and it took me another 2 years to get to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, And I went to Alcoholics Anonymous in Hawaii. I went there, and I go to AA there, and they go, oh, is there anyone new? And I'd raise my hand, and I'd be like, oh, I'm Pat, and I'm an addict. And oh, geez, you don't do that in AA. I mean, everyone turns around, looks at you. They're like, there's an addict in the room. Let's get him out of here, And, it's like, screw you guys in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm out of here. And I leave AA, and I'd slam the door for effect because I wanted you guys to know how pissed off I was. And no one ever followed me out of the rooms and said, hey, kid, here's a big book of AA. Why don't you go home and read this? Maybe you might identify with alcoholism. And I'd go out there and I'd die. And I'd come back to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'd sit in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous not identifying because I didn't want the judgment from people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'd make that promise. I'd come to AA and I'd say, I promise I'm not going to drink. And I'd leave Alcoholics Anonymous and I'd walk in the liquor store to get a pack of cigarettes. I'd walk out with a pint of tequila and I'd be drunk just like that. And I'd come back to AA and I'd sit here and I wouldn't identify as new. And I'd make a promise and I'd leave AA and I'd get a pack of cigarettes. I'd walk out with a pint of tequila and I was drunk just like that. And I make the promise after promise after promise after promise. And in those promises, I heard someone say that they were alcoholic and an addict. And like I can identify with that. It started to make sense to me. So I'd say, oh, I'm Pat. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. And some old timer from across the room would go, well, put $2 in the basket. Ha, 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 And everyone in the AA meeting would laugh at the stupid addict and alcoholic because he doesn't know how to identify in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that judgment ran me right out of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I went out there and I'd die. And we have a responsibility statement around here that says when anyone, anywhere, reaches out for help, we want the hand of AA to be there, and for that I'm responsible. There's no judgment in that. I have a responsibility to sit down with the new man and read from the blank page to page 43 through the first step and identify my alcoholism as it relates to the big book in hopes that his alcoholism wakes up and he becomes an alcoholic. It's my responsibility. And I went out there and I die. I came to one time in a motel apartment. I don't know where I was. I was in a bathtub. I was completely naked. I was physically and sexually assaulted. Had blood come every hole in my body. I looked around the bathroom. There was no towel. There was no clothes. I looked at the door and knew I had to go down the hallway of shame. Wasn't the first, second, third, fourth, fifth time. It wasn't going to be the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th time that was going to happen to me. I walked down the hallway. I was violently shaking. I was kind of covering myself up. There was 3 dudes on a couch. There were some clothes that kind of looked like mine. I went downstairs. I looked across the street, and there was a liquor store. And I'm going into that liquor store to get a pint of tequila, and I reached my hand in my pocket and I pulled out this guy's number from AA. And I called the guy and he said, "Can you promise me not to drink? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Can you make a promise not to drink?" And one more time I made that promise. I said, "I promise I'm not going to drink. Can you hurry up?" And I walked in the liquor store to get a pack of cigarettes. I walked out with a pint of tequila and I was drunk just like that. And I came out of a blackout in front of, I don't know, it's not this many. It seemed like this many, but there was this old timer and he had like 40 something years and he was giving me a big book and he's like, "I want to welcome you to AA." And I was pissed. Came out of a blackout in the camp out on the North Shore at the Countdown. And I was angry and I didn't want to be in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I felt the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous because those guys took me to the serving line of the food and they gave me a spoon and they said, "Just serve food." And you would come and I would serve food on your plate. And I would serve food on your plate. And for a short period of time, I got out of myself to not think about the problems in my life and I felt okay. But right when I got back, I went straight to the liquor store and I drank. And somehow I made it back to the mainland in California. And for the last year and a half of my drinking, I was downtown on Skid Row. I hadn't showered in 6 months when I got sober. I was up for 20 days. I was 98 pounds. I had 2 shoes, only one had a sole. I stood in the corner and I was like, I thought I was an antenna. I thought the aliens were communicating through me to get important information from you guys, and I saw the devil and his troops. They followed me wherever I went. I heard voices in my head. They told me who to do things to and where to go. And the only solution I had to that was I had the stolen beach cruiser. I found 2 sticks about this long. I twined them together like a cross and I stuck them in the handlebars of my bike and I cruised around Skid Row like that. And our literature says that our alcoholic life seems the only normal one. I go down to Skid Row 2, 3, 4 times a month and I see guys on the corner talking to themselves just like me. I'm not living any different. I draw a line in the sand, a line in the sand, a line in the sand. When I get that bad, then I'll get sober. When this happens, I'll get sober. One of my things was like, when I have to push a shopping cart around, then I'll get sober, And so I had a homie. I just put my stuff in his shopping cart and we cruised around like that, But my last hustle in the end on Skid Row as a straight man, I'd walk into a gay bar and I'd flirt with enough dudes to get enough alcohol in my body and hope that I'd make it out before I blacked out. And sometimes I would, and sometimes I wouldn't. I was looking at 3.5 years in prison. I was trying to get to the Salvation Army program in Orange County, California, and my mom had gone to Al-Anon, and the money stopped coming, And I came to on October 23rd, 2002 in bed with a guy I had no clue who he was, but knew what I did the night before in order to get what I needed to get. And I had a moment of clarity. And in that moment, my whole life flashed before my eyes. And in that moment of clarity, I could no longer imagine my life continuing down the path I was going. I could no longer imagine it without alcohol. I couldn't see it sober. And I had this deep down intuition that said, "Why don't you call your mom and ask for help?" I picked up the phone. I called my mom and I said, "Mom, I need help." And my mom on the other end of the line, she said, "Patrick," she said, "I can't help you anymore. She just stay right where you are and someone from Alcoholics Anonymous will come and get you. So if I come and get you, I'm going to end up killing you." And she hung up on me. My mom sent me a text right at 7:30. It said, "Make sure you tell the truth, The truth is if my mom would have came one more time, I would have manipulated her for $20 more, and I can guarantee you I wouldn't be standing here tonight. And I can tell you that Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't attractive that day. These 2 goofy dudes from AA came. My mom called a guy from AA, and I'm so grateful that he understood the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous because he didn't tell my mom, "Have the kid call me. If he's willing, he'll call me." What he said was, "Where is he at?" And my mom gave him the address where I was at, and that guy went and grabbed a new guy. And they showed up to that motel, and they walked in the motel, and it was this guy had crazy hair, and he was annoying. He was like, "My name's Jack, I'm an alcoholic." And I was like, whoa, my body was like vibrating. And there's this other guy, he had a walker. He was like, "My name's John, and I have 90 days, And I'm like, I'm like, good for you, dude. You know what I mean? That alcoholic arrogance, judging those people that came for fun and for free. I didn't believe in God until I had 10 and a half years sober. If you're new and you're struggling with the God idea, just keep coming back. But I can tell you that God entered my life that day, and I didn't know it at the time. Because that guy Jack said, why don't you come with me, kid? I've never trusted men my whole life. I've never met my father. I've never trusted men. And that guy Jack said, why don't you come with me, kid? And I got off that bed and I followed that guy out of that motel. And I got downstairs and that guy Jack looked at me and he said, if you need to throw up, he's like, just throw up on the floor, you know? I was like, what? He's like, well, it's a 12-step van. Don't worry about it, you know? And I was like, 12-step van? What the hell is that? You know, he's like, well, you might have one day, you know? I'm like, oh, great. You know, 12-step van. I got in the van and that guy Jack started telling me my story. He didn't lecture, or his story. He didn't lecture me. He started telling me his story. And he talked about losing the kids, losing the wife, and losing the business. And I started to shut off to the message of Alcoholics Anonymous because I never had a wife, I never had a business, and I never had kids. And when I started to shut off to the message, he started to talk about the way he felt when he got to AA. He talked about the shame, he talked about the guilt, he talked about the fear, and he talked about that loneliness. And for the first time in my life, I related to another human being. I knew that that man knew how I felt on the inside that moment. And I ended up at a place called Charlie Street in Costa Mesa. Low bottom indigent detox. No more soft serve ice cream. Sit down, shut up. We don't want what you have. If you want what we have, then you'll do what we do. If not, there's the door. Don't waste our time. That's the kind of AA I got sober. And that guy, Jack, said, he didn't say, hey, go find a guy that has what you want. He said, hey, do you have a sponsor? I'm like, no. He's like, okay. I was like, well, what do you say? He's like, just say, will you be my sponsor? I'm like, all right, cool, man. He's like, well, what do you say? I said, will you be my sponsor? He said, I'd love to be your sponsor, you know? And he had a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and a pack of Marlboro Reds. And I was like, hey, Jack, can I get a cigarette? He's like, no problem. Have a seat. And he sat down at the table and he put the pack of cigarettes in between and he started to read the big book of AA. And I smoked a cigarette and I asked for another cigarette. He's like, no problem. And he just kept reading. Like, hey, can I have another cigarette? He's like, no problem. He just kept reading. And he talked about this physical allergy in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He talked about a physical allergy that every time he put a drink in his body, he ended up in jail. And I was like, really? Tell me more about that. And he'd say, well, sometimes I would drink and then I would drink and then I would drink and I ended up in the hospital. I never really ended up in the hospital, but I always ended up in jail. And my head started to bob. And I started to think every time I drink, I end up going to jail. And I drink just like Jack. But see, I always had pride about how much I could drink. I knew I was an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. I'll drink you. I'll drink you under the table, right? But he kept reading and he talked about this mental obsession. He talked about the thinking that preceded the first drink. And my ears perked up. I was like, what? Because I never understood, man, why I always picked up. I didn't want to come to in bed with a dude one more time. And that happened time and time and time and time again. I remember being in jail and I'd be in jail. My mom would come see me and she'd say, Patrick, just go to AA. And I'd say, alcohol's not my problem, Mom. Heroin's my problem. And I get out of jail and I'd walk downstairs. I call for a ride. I walk in the liquor store. I get a 12-pack of beer. I walk in the donut store. I drink one beer. Shame, guilt, remorse goes away. In the middle of the second beer, I think, I wonder what they're doing down the street. I walk down the street. I meet a new friend. Before you know it, we're business partners. Before you know it, I'm back in jail. How'd I get here? H&I comes. I'm like super sober guy. My mom would say, just go to AA. I'm not going to AA. Crack cocaine's my problem. I get out of jail. I go, well, alcohol's not really that bad. An hour before I'm getting out of jail, I walk in call for a ride. I walk in the liquor store, get a 12-pack of beer, walk in the donut store, drink one beer. Fear goes away. In the middle of the second beer, I go, I wonder what they're doing down the street. Before you know it, I meet a new friend. Now we're in a motel. We're saving the world's problems. Before you know it, I'm back in jail. Alcohol's not my problem. I get out. The guard's like, hey, we'll see you next week, kid. Get a 12-pack of beer, one beer. Fear goes away. In the middle of the second beer, I'm down the street. 2 hours later, I'm back in jail. And what had happened from a member who had a working knowledge of the big book, understood alcoholism. He looked at me and he said, if if you can concede both propositions, physical and mental, he said you might be alcoholic. He didn't say you are, he said you might be. And I looked at Jack and I said, Jack, I'm alcoholic. And it was the greatest gift that anyone had given me, was the gift of being an alcoholic. Because he said all that other stuff, we don't care in Alcoholics Anonymous. All we care about is your drinking. And we care about the thinking that precedes that first drink. And if you don't find a God, you're going to be back drinking. At 90 days of sobriety, I was on my 9th step. But before I get into my 9th step, the second greatest gift that guy gave me was he looked at me and he said, I want you to take a shower. And I was like, how do you know I didn't take a shower? And he said, I want you to read the big book. I tried to read the big book. It sounded like the Charlie Brown show. Wah, 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 wah. I went upstairs. I turned the water on. I sat there for an hour and a half and I stared at the water and I cried. And Jack came and he brought in some nice clothes and he walked up in there. And he allowed me to have my dignity. He put his arm around me. He said, kid, he said, it's all going to be okay. And that guy coached me into the shower. And he took a sponge and that guy cleaned my back. And for the first time in my life, I felt love from another human being. I didn't get in the shower because I was denying his direction. I couldn't get in the shower because the water hurt my skin. And that's the love that I feel in this room tonight. It's the love that I felt in that marathon meeting this morning when I walked in there dying. Whenever I put my hand out and ask for help, you take my hand and you walk with me. Had 90 days of sobriety. I had to make amends to my mom. I owe my mom a lot of money, and my mom's an active member of AA. And I remember sitting down with my mom, and I made this amends, and she was just so happy. And she was just like, oh my God, I just want you to get in the middle of AA and help people. And I'm like, oh, this is such a great moment. Like, we're healing. And I left my mom. I gave her a big hug. I told her I loved her, and I went to go see my sponsors. Like, yeah, but what about the money? I was like, well, she doesn't want the money. He said, yeah, but AA wants you to pay it back. I thought, man, I'm never telling this guy anything ever again, Screw this guy. I was 27 years old. I was living with my mom, and he made me write this note. Mom, I love you and I appreciate you today, and I leave her $25. Next week comes along. Mom, I love you and I appreciate you today, and I leave her $25. Next week, Mom, I love you and I appreciate you today, and I leave her $25. I don't know how long it was, 6 months, a year, but my mom took me to lunch. My mom sat me down, and my mom looked at me and she said, Patrick, she goes, I don't want the money anymore, but I still want the notes, I had no clue what that action was going to do. I called my mom this morning. I said, Mom, I want you to know I love you and I appreciate you today. Even greater than that, allows me to look at you guys in the eyes and tell you I love you and I appreciate you today. The greatest gift that action did for me was it allows me to look at the new man in the eye and tell the new man that I love you and I appreciate you today. And if you're new, you don't have to live the way you've been living again if you don't want to. As long as you're willing to do a few simple things around Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't come to Alcoholics Anonymous to love anybody. Came to Alcoholics Anonymous, so I'd have to come to one more time in bed with a dude I had no clue who he was. AA boy meets AA girl on AA campus, and what happened in Vegas for us didn't stay in Vegas because she got pregnant, and you know what I mean? Like, we're in young people, running around, icky paw, and everything, outreaching everywhere, and I don't know about you. I know there's a lot of healthy relationships in here, but I'm terrified of being alone. I'm terrified of being loved. I'm this whack job, you know what I mean? I'm like, love me, stay over there. Love me, stay over there, right? And so I was terrified, and so I broke up with her, and I had this great idea to sleep with her friend, and bad idea, I mean, I don't know what the cheers are for. I'll tell you that behavior almost killed me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll get into it, you know what I mean? Because I'm suffering from untreated alcoholism. But she got pregnant, and then her friend made amends and said, hey, this is what's going down. And my sponsor said, you're not going to F your way out of AA either. You're going to sit in the home group with her and that girl week after week. And she wanted to go to therapy. He said, you're going to go to therapy week after week after week for 15 months and talk about your behavior. I remember being in the labor room, my son being born. My son came out, and I don't know what happened, but I looked right into the eyes of God. If you're new, my message isn't go have babies and find God. That's not the message here, you know what I mean? But I looked at my kid, I looked right into the eyes of God, and it was like a chisel that started to come out and knock the ice off of my heart. I was being a service in AA. I remember looking at my sponsor. I was mad that you guys were going bowling and getting girlfriends. I wasn't getting any. I had to be a service here, be a service there. And I looked at my sponsor. I'm like, why do I got to be on service? And he looked at me and he said, son, he said, your whole life you've been a taker. He said, what we're going to do here in Alcoholics Anonymous is we're going to turn you into a giver. And I was like, oh, great, a giver. That's what I want to be. You know what I mean? But I'm so grateful for the women in AA that would come here and they would share their pain about how the father of their child didn't pay child support. They would come here and they would talk about the pain, about how the father of their child didn't show up one more time. Because your pain taught me how to be a father. I remember calling the women in AA. My son had the hiccups. I took care of him for the first 6 months of his life. She worked. I was a student. He had the hiccups. I call the women in AA. I'm like, what do I do? They're like, what do you do when you have the hiccups? I'm like, wait. They're like, perfect. Click, you know. But my son would cry, and I learned all on my own that I could put him on my head and kind of just walk around, and he wouldn't cry, you know. And my sponsee was at my house, and I was on my computer, and he was on my lap, and I stood up, and I put him on my head, and I put his head right into a ceiling fan. I was like, whack. That's what I did. That's what my sponsee did. My sponsee went to grab my kid. I handed my kid to my sponsee. I went to the back room, and I got on my knees and prayed to a God I didn't believe in. Because, see, my feet were trained in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm so grateful for sponsorship that's always guided me to God before dependence on sponsor. Because I got on my knees, right? And I prayed. I go, Mike, this was my prayer. God, I really don't believe in you, but I don't know what to do, and I'm scared. And all of a sudden, intuition, it came from my closet. It said, man, you need to, I don't know why you're talking to me. You need to call the doctor, dude. You know? I was like, wow, profound. And so I called the doctor, and the doctor told me what to do, and I got my son. I looked him in the eyes, and he didn't have a concussion. He had a little bump on his head. But what had happened for me was, for the first time in my life, I cared more about another human being than I cared about myself. And that guy, Jack, didn't lie to me that day. Me and my son's mom aren't together. But because of the 9th step amends, me and that woman are best friends today. She came here last night. We're Giants fans. Sorry. And I know we won last night. And but they came out here to go to the Giants game, and we spent time together. No means that woman should even talk to me. But I'm terrified. I'm terrified to be in a relationship with you. And I get in another relationship with another woman, I do the same behavior. And I go to AA and I hear things like, just be a service, get out of yourself. Well, dude, there's a lot of service to be done around here. I can do a lot of bad behavior and do a lot of service to get out of myself. And what had happened for me at 8.5 years of sobriety, because of one more broken relationship, because of my behavior, I was driving my car down the road, waiting for my car to hit 100 miles an hour so I can drive in oncoming traffic. And I heard a voice in the back seat of my car that said, why don't you call that guy Jonathan from your Tuesday night meeting before you kill yourself? It was 11 o'clock at night. This guy's much older than me. I picked up the phone, and he answered in one ring. He said, I've been waiting for this call for a year. And I said, I'm going to kill myself. And he said, why don't you meet me at Denny's before you kill yourself? And I said, all right, man, I'll meet you there. And he said, no, I'm going to stay on the phone till you get there. Because, see, he knew I wasn't going to show up. And I walked into Denny's, and he opened the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he opened the book to page 52. And he started to read these bedevilments, couldn't control my emotional natures, prey to misery and depression, couldn't seem to be of use to anyone else, couldn't make a living. And I was sitting there crying, and he looked at me and he said, what you think is one more broken relationship? He said, what you're suffering from is untreated alcoholism. I was at the meeting earlier today, and someone in the meeting was like, well, you're right where you're supposed to be. Nothing happens in God's world by mistake. I don't know about you, but I need a message that has depth and weight. I need to know you've been where I've been. And he took me through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was suicidal in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous for a year. It's kind of taboo to talk around here that I don't believe in God until I had 10.5 years of sobriety to talk about suicide around here. But I don't mean like it was a fleeting thought. I mean, for a year, I was suicidal going through the steps. I would call Jonathan, I'm going to jump off the freeway bridge, and he would say, just go to the AA meeting and help someone. If you want to kill yourself after the AA meeting, go ahead. So I'd show up to the AA meeting, and I'd put my hand out to the new guy, and he's like, hey, will you be my sponsor? And I'm like, sure, I'll be your sponsor, and then I'd take that little guy hostage. You're coming with me, and so I don't want to die, and I'm so grateful for the men in my life, the guys that call me sponsor, because the guys in my life saved my life more than I'll ever save theirs. One alcoholic working with another alcoholic allows me to stay sober one day at a time around here, and that's it. I was about a year in, and Jonathan looked at me and said, you need to make amends to your dad. You need to make amends to God. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm not making amends to my dad, and I'm not making amends to God. Screw that. I was up for 4 days. I was 30 pounds underweight in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, suicidal. I'm in my living room of my apartment. I'm screaming. I'm yelling at God. Screw you. I hate you. Why do I have this life? Why do I have to be tormented? And I felt this pressure on my shoulder that pushed me off the couch, and I was in the fetal position on the floor. I was screaming and I was crying, and all of a sudden the words came out of my mouth. And I started to make amends to a man I've never met. Because I didn't have any mistakes in that relationship, but I used that man in every relationship in order to manipulate you to keep you at distance. Every relationship with a woman, if I only had a dad to teach me how to be a man, I know how to be a man to you. Every relationship with a man, if I only had a father to teach me how to have an intimate relationship with you, I'd know how to do that. If I only had a father to teach me how to show up for work, I know how to show up for work. And all the words started coming out of my mouth. I started to make amends to this man I never met. For the first time in my life, I was no longer a victim. The power of suicide was taken right out of me, and the power of God went deep down within. Deep down within every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God, and I truly believe at the core of my soul that God's right within. I've had intuition my whole life. My whole life, God has always told me to go down this road, and I've always chosen to go down that road. I'm ending on two stories. It's all lumped together. But my son last February, I took him to dinner one night. I had my son 50% of the time, and I took him to dinner one night, and he was at dinner, and he was crying. And I'm like, what's up, buddy? And he was like, I'm afraid to eat because if I eat, I'm going to choke. And if I choke, I'm going to die. And I'm not equipped to deal with this. I don't know how to deal with this. And I start to get frustrated, and I start to get upset, and I start to tell him, just eat. The next meal comes along, I'm like, just eat. Like, you're going to be all right. 3 days in, all of a sudden, intuition said, why don't you pray with your kid before you eat dinner? So I said, hey, Eden, I said, you want to pray? We started to talk about God. And I started to talk to him about when I pray, I have the courage to walk through it. And so right before the meal, we say a prayer, and I say, come on, buddy, we have the courage to get through it. And Eden ate the meal, and he got through it. Every meal, guess what we do? We pray before our meal. And then all of a sudden, we got to dinner, we got to bedtime, and he was like, oh, I don't want to go to bed, because if I go to bed, I'm going to die. And if I die, I'm going to miss you, Dad. And so I said, let's pray, buddy. Every night before we go to bed, guess what we do? We pray. And then all of a sudden, he had this fear to go to school. I'm like, dude, come on, bro. You know God's with you, bro. And I'm frustrated because I got to get to work. I don't have time to sit here and talk to you about it. I got to get to work. And all of a sudden, intuition said, I looked at my son. I said, Eden, I said, you know when we're driving and I'm talking to the guys on the phone and we talk about being of service? He goes, yeah. I said, why don't you go to school? I said, you know the kid that's on the playground who doesn't have any friends? He goes, yeah. I said, why don't you meet that guy and bring that kid into the front, into the middle of all your friends, and introduce him to all your friends and be a service to that kid. You think you could do that? He said, yeah, I think I could do that, Dad. And we said a prayer, and Eden went off on his way, and I went to go pick him up that day. And he had this big smile on his face from ear to ear, and he looked at me and he said, Dad, I met this kid named Chad. And he was out in the field, and I went and found Chad, and I said, hey, my name's Eden, and introduced myself to him. And Chad started telling me that his parents were getting divorced. And so I started to tell Chad my experience of what it's been like with you and Mom living 30 miles away from each other, and how I've been able to get through that. And I introduced Chad to all my friends. My mom got diagnosed with COPD and 10 years ago, but every year my mom's ended up in the hospital. Because of the 9th step amends, me and my mom I make all the decisions for my mom. I know where my mom's going to be buried. I know that when she gets put on life support, she only wants to be there 7 days. I make all the decisions. I know the deal. And my mom always gets out of the hospital, and this time we go to the hospital 6 months ago, and the doctor calls me in, and the doctor says, your mom's not going to make it. And I'm not equipped to deal with this. I go in the bathroom, get on my knees, I pray to God, and I have this intuition. I go talk to my mom, and Mom says, does Eden know that I'm dying? I'm like, no, Mom, Eden doesn't know that you're dying. Every Tuesday night, it's date night with my mom and Eden. They have a really close relationship, and so I call my son, and he comes down, and me and Lindy, his mom, go to dinner with him, and I sit him down. I said, Eden, I have to have a conversation with you. It's going to be tough. I said, why don't we pray? And we said a prayer, and I told him that, hey, every time we go to the hospital, Grandma makes it out. I said, this time I don't think Grandma's going to make it. And he crossed his arms, and he looked at me and said, why you got to tell me that, Dad? And I looked at my son. I said, son, I said, I trust you enough to tell you the truth. And I said, do you think you could be a service to Grandma and go say goodbye to Grandma? Do you think you could go to the hospital and be kind and be loving to Grandma? And he looked at me and said, I think I could do it, Dad. He said, but I'm scared, He was 8 at the time. When we go to see Grandma, and I'm standing at the foot of the bed with my son's mom, she's crying on my shoulder, and my son comes walking in. My mom's on a breathing treatment, and my son walks up and he grabs my mom's hand, and my mom takes the breathing treatment, and she said, when you enter my life, Eden, you gave me the gift of kindness and you gave me the gift of love. And she said, when you entered my life, you've allowed me to love the women in Alcoholics Anonymous that much deeper. And all of a sudden, I watched this spirit leave my mom's body. My mom took the breathing treatment off, and she said, because of this breathing treatment, Eden, she's like, I'm going to be able to get out of here, and I'm going to be able to spend more time with you. Because of this breathing treatment, Eden, I'm going to be able to help the women in Alcoholics Anonymous that much more. And my son, his big smile on his face, he looked at my mom, and he goes, Grandma, he's like, you're going to be all right. I was like, what the heck, you know what I mean? My son walked out, and the nurse went to grab him, and he looked at the nurse. He's like, oh, she's getting out of the hospital in 3 days, you know what I mean? I wanted to ask him to be my sponsor, 3 days later, my mom was out of the hospital. I don't believe in God 99% of the time, but I believed in God in that moment. I watched the power of healing happen right in that moment. If you're new here in Alcoholics Anonymous, I come to Alcoholics Anonymous so that I can look into the eyes of men and women that should be dead. We get the break today to sit here and be alive and help one another. I come in here to look into the evidence of God's work. If you're new here in Alcoholics Anonymous, my message for you tonight is that Alcoholics Anonymous is a lot more than just not drinking. Alcoholics Anonymous is a process of growing up. And it's my prayer every night that you find a sponsor that cares more about your life than the way you feel. I want to thank the committee for allowing me to be of service, and I love you all. Thank you.